The Secret Space Race, USSR's Lost Missions Exposed. Declassified Soviet documents uncover failed space launches and tragic cosmonaut fates the world never knew about, until now. The world has long known of the Cold War space rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, a duel of rockets, science, and ideology that reached its climax with the moon landing in 1969. But for every Sputnik and Vostok proudly paraded before the world, a darker, unspoken history was buried deep beneath layers of secrecy. Hidden in vaults and airbrushed from photographs were tales of missions that never returned, of cosmonauts who disappeared not just into space, but into oblivion. It was only in early 2025, after a series of archival releases from the Russian state military archives and whistleblowers from within Roscosmos, that the first true glimpse into these long-concealed tragedies emerged. These weren't merely failed missions, they were suppressed human catastrophes, erased from existence by a regime obsessed with maintaining an illusion of unbroken triumph. The Phantom Program. The documents paint a chilling picture of a secret initiative, parallel to the public Vostok and Voskhod programs, codenamed Zvezda 3. Initiated in 1958, even before Yuri Gagarin's historic flight, this covert program aimed to leapfrog NASA by achieving spectacular, even reckless, firsts, spacewalks, multi-person orbits, and deep space manned missions. But without the public scrutiny, the same pressure to succeed at all costs led to corner-cutting, political interference, and ultimately, disaster. One of the earliest missions chronicled in the files, designated Cosmos 18Z, involved a suborbital flight in March 1959. The pilot, Senior Lieutenant Oleg Tatarinov, was launched aboard an early version of the Vostok capsule fitted with untested life support systems. Radio transmissions captured by Western ham operators at the time, long dismissed as hoaxes, described panicked breathing and a garbled plea, "I can see flames. My capsule is burning." The Soviet Union denied any launch had occurred. Tatarinov's military records were sealed. His family was told he died in a training accident. Lost in orbit. In June 1960, Zvezda 3 mission L-13 was launched from Baikonur under the cover of darkness. It carried 2 cosmonauts, Anatoly Basharin and Viktor Kuryakin. The mission was intended to conduct a long-duration orbital flight of 5 days, an attempt to outdo the brief Mercury Redstone flights conducted by the Americans. According to telemetry records recovered from the declassified data, the mission initially succeeded. But within 48 hours, communications ceased. Tracking radar in Plesetsk and Crimea detected the capsule remaining in a deteriorating orbit for more than 2 weeks. It finally re-entered Earth's atmosphere somewhere over the South Pacific. The re-entry angle was too steep, burn-up was almost certain. No announcement was made. No honors given. Basharin and Kuryakin simply ceased to exist. Internal memos show frantic communication between the KGB, Politburo, and Roscosmos, with Premier Khrushchev himself ordering that all photographic records and personnel files of the 2 men be destroyed or reassigned under false names. The moon shot that never was. While Apollo 11's success eclipsed all other lunar efforts, the Soviets had their own moon landing ambitions. Most famously the N-1 rocket, a massive, 4-stage beast that never made it off the pad without exploding. What the public never knew was that an actual crewed lunar attempt was launched in December 1968, predating Apollo 11 by 6 months. Documents refer to the mission only as Luna Ventura. Cosmonaut Commander Alexei Dobrovolsky and flight engineer Leonid Gorshenko were launched aboard a modified Soyuz variant secretly attached to a prototype lunar lander, the LK-700. Unlike the planned step-by-step development approach of NASA, Soviet engineers were pressured to skip ground tests and simulations. Everything went wrong. The 3rd stage of the N-1 failed mid-flight, sending the crew into a high Earth orbit instead of the translunar trajectory. Ground controllers lost contact soon after. American NORAD systems tracked an unidentified object tumbling erratically beyond geosynchronous orbit for several days before it vanished. A single, chilling memo from a KGB operative, recovered from the archive, reads, "Ventura's crew presumed perished. Retrieval impossible. Directive issued, total denial." Silent echoes, the ghost cosmonauts. Among the most haunting discoveries are recordings made by Italian amateur radio operators, the Giudica Cordiglia brothers, during the 1960s. They claimed to have intercepted several distress signals from dying cosmonauts. The Soviet Union dismissed these as fabrications. The newly revealed documents suggest otherwise. A 1961 flight, designated K-8 prototype test, involved a female cosmonaut, codenamed Tatiana 6. This flight predates Valentina Tereshkova's famous 1963 mission. The recording captured by the Judica Cordiglia station includes a woman's voice crying in Russian. "Am I going to die? I feel heat. The door won't open." The transcript matches entries found in mission logs stored at the Keldysh Research Center. The capsule, with no heat shielding due to a design error, disintegrated on re-entry. The name of the pilot remains uncertain. The codename is All That Survives. Cover UPS and catastrophes. With each failed launch came an elaborate campaign of erasure. Engineers who spoke out were reassigned to Arctic outposts or mental institutions. Journalists who investigated too deeply disappeared or suffered fatal accidents. One such case, detailed in the files, involved journalist Marina Lidovskaya, who reported on unexplained tremors near Baikonur in 1962. The same day, a launchpad explosion killed more than 100 engineers during the fueling of an R-9 Desna rocket. Litovskaya vanished 2 weeks later. Her final article was never published, her typewriter confiscated by KGB officers. Her family was told she had defected to the West. The Forgotten Martyrs. Beneath the heroic narrative of Gagarin, Titov, and Leonov lies a long, blood-stained trail of men and women whose sacrifice was buried by the very system they served. These weren't just technical failures, they were human tragedies multiplied by the inhuman machinery of political secrecy. In one of the final documents, a grim directive issued in 1973 by the Central Committee states, "All future accidents of manned flight, if non-recoverable, are to be classified indefinitely. Memory is a luxury we can no longer afford." The full impact of these revelations is only beginning to unfold. Roscosmos has yet to officially comment. Memorial efforts are underway in several independent museums and among advocacy groups for transparency in space exploration history. A new generation of Russian scientists, many descendants of those who once worked in silence, is demanding a reckoning. The forgotten cosmonauts may never be recovered, but their story, at last, is no longer hidden among the stars. The fatal ambitions of Sergei Korolev. One of the most fascinating and tragic figures in the entire secret history is Sergei Korolev, the Soviet Union's chief designer and father of the space program. Publicly celebrated for his genius and leadership, Korolev carried a darker burden few outside the inner circle ever knew. Recently released correspondence between Korolev and high-ranking members of the Central Committee reveal his mounting despair over the Zvezda 3 program. In a handwritten letter dated November 1962, months after the failed L-13 flight, he pleads, "They are not machines. They are men. The pressures from the Politburo have led us to turn cosmonauts into cannonballs." Korolev's deep concern was compounded by worsening health. Following years of imprisonment in Stalin's Gulag and a secret surgery in 1960 to remove a tumor, poorly executed due to state-imposed secrecy, he became increasingly erratic. Friends and colleagues note that he aged rapidly, driven not just by workload, but by the deaths that haunted him. One story from a surviving engineer, Konstantin Dravko, tells of Korolev breaking down in tears after listening to a final radio transmission from Zvezda 3 mission G5, a two-man mission that ended with the capsule spiraling uncontrollably back to Earth. The cosmonauts, Georgy Belinsky and Marat Kozakov, burned up over Siberia. Korolev's private journal entry for that night reads, "Their screams still echo in the silence of my mind. I am building graves among the stars." The second Gagarin. One of the most explosive claims in the documents centers on what some insiders called the second Gagarin. While Yuri Gagarin became a national hero after his April 1961 orbit, the files suggest an earlier mission took place, one that failed catastrophically. Designated Project K-1A, this flight supposedly launched on April 7, 1961, just days before Gagarin's publicized journey. Its pilot, Lieutenant Vladimir Ilyin, age 27, an equally promising cosmonaut selected for his physical resilience and obedience. According to internal mission logs and pre-launch photographs, Ilyin's flight was intended as a final test before Gagarin's globally broadcast mission. But the launch vehicle suffered a stage separation failure. The capsule achieved a low, unstable orbit and failed to return. It remained aloft for 2 orbits before plunging into the North Atlantic, well outside the USSR's retrieval capabilities. No acknowledgement was ever made. The official roster of cosmonauts removed Alin's name, and his family was relocated to a remote village in Yakutia. His parents received a forged notice claiming he had died in a car crash during training. His grave is empty. The Cosmonaut Cemetery. Within the outskirts of Baikonur Cosmodrome lies a quiet, unmarked area known colloquially among engineers as Sector K. Overgrown with weeds and surrounded by rusted chain-link fences, this patch of land, according to newly uncovered blueprints and KGB memos, is believed to hold the cremated remains of at least 9 cosmonauts who perished in missions never disclosed to the public. One document, labeled RS-09 Black Star, describes the burial of subject number 17, identified only as Kuznetsov, internal depressurization, DOA upon retrieval. A photograph attached to the file shows a sealed zinc coffin being lowered into the ground by men in radiation suits. No monuments. No prayers. Just silence. This cemetery, now partially confirmed by satellite imagery and whistleblower testimony, stands as a haunting monument to a hidden cost of Soviet space glory. The Venus mission. Operation Molniya V. In 1967, just months after the Soyuz 1 disaster that killed cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov, the USSR launched a bold initiative to send a crewed probe toward Venus. Internally dubbed Operation Molniya V, the program was staggeringly ambitious and profoundly dangerous. According to records, a stripped-down Soyuz variant, fitted with long-duration life support systems and experimental radiation shielding, was launched with 2 cosmonauts, Andrei Stoyanov and Lyubov Zaitseva, the latter a medical doctor and the first woman assigned to deep spaceflight. The plan was not to land or even orbit Venus, but to execute a flyby that would slingshot the craft around the planet and return to Earth within 120 days. On paper, it was mathematically sound. In practice, it was suicide. Just 4 days into the mission, solar flare activity spiked dramatically. The shielding failed. Final communications recorded physiological failure, radiation sickness, organ collapse, neurological disorientation. Zaitseva's last words, reportedly, were whispered through static. "We are still human, aren't we? Please remember that." Their craft drifted beyond Venus gravity, its trajectory eventually taking it into interplanetary space. It has not been tracked since. The USSR declared the Venus launch unmanned and never mentioned it again. Whispers in the West. As new revelations emerge, former NASA and CIA analysts have begun to corroborate long-dismissed rumors. Declassified American reconnaissance satellite photos from 1960 to 1970, reanalyzed with modern imaging, show multiple burn scars on Soviet launch pads with no matching public announcements. One particular image from May 1964 shows what appears to be an escape tower deployed mid-flight, indicative of an aborted manned launch. U.S. intercept teams also recorded emergency frequencies being used in the 144 MHz range, commonly associated with crew distress signals. A retired NSA operative, speaking anonymously, recalled listening to one such broadcast. There were words in Russian, sobbing, then silence. We logged it, filed it, but politics kept it quiet. It wasn't our place to unravel their dead. Legacy of silence. The burden of secrecy wasn't limited to the fallen. Survivors of failed missions, if any existed, were often hidden away, deemed mentally unstable or security risks. A 1978 memo from the Ministry of Internal Affairs references Patient B-41, a former cosmonaut believed to have survived a catastrophic re-entry and suffered permanent neurological damage. Housed in a state sanatorium outside Novosibirsk, B-41's identity is unknown, but staff notes describe him murmuring launch codes and orbital telemetry in his sleep. When asked his name, he reportedly replied, "I saw Earth blink. Then it left me behind." Opening the files. The decision to declassify these documents was not made lightly. A new generation of Russian officials, faced with mounting pressure from historians, activists, and international observers, chose transparency over legacy. Dr. Irina Mikhailova, head archivist of the Russian State Space Archive, put it best. "We cannot build a future among the stars if our foundation is built on ghosts. These men and women were pioneers. They deserve names, not numbers." Efforts are now underway to establish a memorial at Baikonur, one that includes the names of all fallen cosmonauts, known and newly revealed. For many families, this is the first confirmation of long-suspected truths. For others, it's a reopening of wounds sealed decades ago. And still, we look up. The tragedy of the lost Soviet missions is not merely a Cold War footnote. It is a human story of ambition, courage, deception, and, ultimately, redemption. These were not propaganda pawns or nameless engineers. They were explorers, every bit as brave as those who made history on live television. Now, with the veil lifted, the world begins to remember them. The stars they reached for may have been darkened by secrecy, but in truth, they never stopped shining. Echoes of a doomed generation. With each newly uncovered mission, a larger pattern becomes clear. The Soviet space program was as much about political performance as it was scientific advancement. The cosmonauts involved in these doomed projects were not thrill-seeking pilots or engineers seeking glory. They were patriots drawn into a machinery that valued optics over life. One entry in the declassified Zvezda 3 program logs details a 1971 mission titled Sirius 2, a high-risk operation to test the endurance of cosmonauts in zero gravity for over 30 days, surpassing anything NASA had accomplished by that point. The cosmonauts, Dmitry Varnin and Mikhail Alyokhin, were veterans of earlier, aborted missions. Their capsule successfully entered low Earth orbit and for nearly a month sent back data, telemetry, and even journal entries. But then, disaster. On day 34, ground control lost pressure readings from their life support system. A final radio message, barely decipherable, hinted at an oxygen leak. Satellite tracking showed the capsule's orbit slowly decaying. When Soviet search crews recovered it weeks later in a remote area of Mongolia, they found both men dead. Autopsies suggested slow hypoxia, suffocation in silence. The capsule was dismantled. The deaths were attributed to a training accident in official reports. The journal entries were shredded, save for one final page preserved by a technician, reading, "Space is vast and beautiful. We only regret we could not see more of it before the darkness took us." The children of the lost. Today, as the truth finally surfaces, many of the victims' families are discovering long-held suspicions confirmed. For decades, widows and children were told that their loved ones had died in plane crashes, fires, or automobile accidents. Their questions were met with silence or threats. Anatoly Basharin's daughter, Irina, now in her late 60s, spoke out for the first time following the release of her father's mission files. "They told my mother he was reassigned to a classified submarine program. We never saw him again. My mother died believing he was alive somewhere. She kept his uniform in a glass case. Now I know. He died among the stars, not in a sea of lies." Across Russia, small grassroots organizations have begun organizing remembrance vigils for the ghost cosmonauts. Makeshift shrines appear outside cosmodromes, on campuses, in railway stations, places once trafficked by those young men and women destined never to return. A reckoning begins. Facing international attention and domestic calls for accountability, the Russian Federation Space Agency, Roscosmos, has issued a formal acknowledgement of the declassified material. In a subdued press conference, Roscosmos Director General Andrei Velikanov stated, "We cannot change the past, but we can honor it with honesty. These brave explorers helped shape the future of spaceflight. Their sacrifices, once hidden, will now be part of our shared history." Velikanov announced the establishment of the Orbital Martyrs Memorial, to be located at the Museum of Cosmonautics in Moscow, where a new wing will be dedicated exclusively to the Zvezda 3 program and its fallen. An interactive wall will allow visitors to view mission logs, listen to final transmissions, and see restored photos, many believed lost for over 60 years. Efforts are also underway to establish international recognition of these missions through the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, UNUSA, which is reviewing petitions from historians, scientists, and families for official commemoration. Lessons from the shadows. The full impact of these revelations extends beyond Russia. For the global spacefaring community, the exposed Soviet missions serve as stark reminders of the cost of secrecy and the dangers of unchecked political pressure on scientific endeavor. NASA Administrator Dr. Evelyn Guerra commented during a recent symposium at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. "The Soviet Union's hidden losses aren't just their story. They're ours too. We share a sky, a mission, and a responsibility. We must never allow ambition to outrun ethics again." International space law scholars have renewed calls for more robust transparency protocols between agencies, especially as new players like private corporations and emerging national programs take on increasingly ambitious missions. The message is clear: Exploration must be rooted in humanity, not hubris. Final transmission. In the final pages of the archive, one fragment stands out, a decrypted message from Zvezda 3 Mission A9, dated April 12, 1965. It was recovered from a degraded magnetic tape stored in a mislabeled crate deep within the Keldysh Institute. Transcribed and translated, the voice, believed to be that of cosmonaut Sergei Antonov, speaks calmly into the void. If anyone hears this, tell my daughter I thought of her every day. I'm not afraid. Tell the world we tried. We reached for the stars, even if we didn't make it back. Don't forget us. That tape now sits in a museum vault, but a copy plays softly every evening in the memorial exhibit. Visitors pause, often with tears in their eyes, as the quiet voice of a long-lost cosmonaut echoes across decades. We reached for the stars. And now, the world finally listens. Postscript: the sky belongs to all. In the end, the story of the USSR's lost missions is not one of failure, but of sacrifice. These men and women were more than casualties of a secret war. They were the unspoken vanguard of humanity's journey beyond Earth. As we look forward to missions to Mars, lunar colonies, and interstellar probes, we carry their memory with us, not as a burden, but as a compass. They remind us that progress must never come at the cost of truth, that silence is not protection, and that no life dedicated to discovery should ever be forgotten. For every name now reclaimed from the shadows, a light is restored to the firmament. Their stories are no longer hidden, their stars no longer nameless, and the heavens are finally, truly shared.